Hello, Milwaukee Bucks fans. Welcome back to Bucks Latest, presented by fanarch.com. I'm your host, Dean Simon, and we're just going to get right into it. We have some interesting developments coming out of Milwaukee recently with new reports from Mark Stein of the Stein Line saying that the Bucks front office will potentially attempt to sway Giannis Antetokounmpo into remaining with the Milwaukee Bucks through an interesting approach. They're going to come to him with the pitch of taking a gap year, not seeking out a trade, not continuing to peddle stuff like Steph Curry's the greatest of all time on social media, sort of like stirring the pot with trade rumors. They're going to come to him with the approach of, hey, Giannis, the Eastern Conference isn't looking too great right now. With Jason Tatum's injury, the Celtics are probably going to be out of things, out of the running for a championship in 2026. The Cleveland Cavaliers also ran into their own injury misfortune in the playoffs, so they couldn't make a deep run. The Knicks, the Pacers, they're good teams, but who says that they're in the Eastern Conference Finals if teams like the Celtics, teams like the Cavs weren't hurt? So while the East is in a little bit of rough shape, Giannis, you might as well just take a gap year and stay with the Bucks, give us a year to retool our roster, get us into a better position to compete for a title. And they're effectively making the promise, Giannis, if you stick around, even though we know that you're a guy that wants to win, you're not satisfied with being mediocre, and we just had 3 straight first-round exits, Giannis, if you stick around, if you give us 1 year to retool this roster, it will be worth it. We can give you the complementary pieces to make a deep playoff run by 2026-27. Is this something that Giannis Antetokounmpo is really going to be for? Who's to say? Because he's not getting any younger. He's still only 30, but by the time that he's in his age 32 season, is he going to be willing to wait that long for possibly the chance at competing? Because the outlook of this team right now looks pretty bleak with Damian Lillard's injury, with several guys like Brook Lopez and, Bobby Portis is getting ready to possibly accept a player option. Brook Lopez is an unrestricted free agent. Guys like Gary Trent Jr., Taurean Prince probably going to leave for some bigger paychecks. Giannis isn't necessarily in the position right now to want to stick with the Milwaukee Bucks, if we're being honest here. The outlook looks pretty bleak. So who's to say that he's not just going to immediately push for a trade to the Houston Rockets, to the San Antonio Spurs, even to another upstart team like the Detroit Pistons, or if he's just going to join an already established team. It really remains to be seen, but it is a very interesting road for the Bucks front office to take, to be like, yeah, you know what? The rest of the East sucks, so we're just going to take this year, we're going to coast, we're going to retool, and we're going to give you an opportunity to compete, maybe. They can't really promise anything because they don't own first-round picks, they don't own second-round picks, so the road to rebuilding, retooling around Giannis isn't necessarily crystal clear. So that's going to be an interesting development in the next couple of weeks to watch. Will Giannis take their advice, or take their suggestion to heart? Will he be okay with being mediocre for another season, possibly having a 4th straight first-round exit? It remains to be seen, but definitely an interesting pitch for the Bucks front office to make. But in that same report from Mark Stein, he also came out and said that Doc Rivers apparently is going to be a major part of whether Giannis Antetokounmpo decides to stay with the Milwaukee Bucks, or at least that's what they want him to believe. That's what they're going to pitch to Giannis in his end-all, be-all talk, I guess, at some point in this off-season period. They're going to come to Giannis and say that, Doc Rivers didn't necessarily lead us past the first round. He didn't necessarily prove that we could be world beaters with him as our lead strategist, but Giannis could find himself in a good situation with Doc just because of his pedigree, because he has a championship under his belt, even though the last couple of years haven't been too kind to Doc Rivers. They might as well try and use Doc Rivers as somewhat of a bargaining chip due to his experience, because they don't really have anybody else lined up to take over the mantle as head coach of the Milwaukee Bucks and to be a guy that Giannis could trust. They might as well use a guy like Doc Rivers, who has that kind of experience as a coach for teams that have gone to the conference finals, to the NBA finals, that have that kind of experience. It's probably the best they're going to get in this kind of situation in terms of coaching hires. So might as well use him as a bargaining chip, if they could use anything as a bargaining chip at this point in the off season. But using those two things in the ultimate pitch for Giannis Antetokounmpo to stay as a Milwaukee Buck, Will it work? Will it not? Again, remains to be seen. Personally, I have my doubts about both of those things for Giannis. But moving forward, it seems as though Damian Lillard's rehab process is going pretty well. He took to Instagram recently to share a couple of photos, really just showing that he's yearning to get back on the court, as one would imagine for a guy like Damian Lillard, who he's one of those guys in the league where you never have to question his motives with regard to the game, with regard to his contract situation. Just he always wants to play basketball. He's one of those guys that's just an unquestioned lover of the game, and that he's always just itching to play and be the best that he can be. And he's shown pictures recently that after suffering his Achilles injury, he's taken some time to link up with players like Jason Tatum, who suffered the same kind of injury this postseason. And, one could argue that maybe they're taking some time to work out together. Maybe they're trying to ask each other questions about their own rehab processes and trying to figure out the best course of action for getting back onto the court in 2025-26 as soon as possible. Of course, Tatum's injury came a little bit later as the Knicks and the Celtics were battling in the Eastern Conference semifinals. Tatum's injury came in Game 4 after he had the game of his life at 42 or 45 points. And it's nice to see that this is sort of a level. Obviously, the two players in question aren't as, at a level as like LeBron James and Kevin Durant working out in the summer. But it's cool to see two superstar guys like this coming to each other, showing love to each other, and just showing that mutual respect and knowing that they're each going to get through this, even though they're at different stages of their careers, with Damian Lillard at about 34, 35 years old, and Tatum smack dab in the prime of his career, won the championship last year, could have led the Celtics to a championship this year, but they were already down in the series. All that stuff, it's hypothetical. But still a very cool development seeing Tatum and Damian Lillard linking up, showing each other that kind of respect as they're both dealing with their individual injuries. So the Milwaukee Bucks have, I guess, gathered this kind of pitch for Giannis to stay as a Buck. But it seems as though, again, according to recent reports, this time from ESPN's Brian Windhorst, that the Golden State Warriors, they're not out of the running in terms of Giannis Antetokounmpo trade rumors, that they are very much still intact, and that a trade for Giannis Antetokounmpo to go to the Warriors, in his words, it's not impossible, and he'd be lying if it wouldn't have the opportunity to happen. And of course, the packages for Giannis going to Golden State and the package coming back to Milwaukee would likely include a guy like Brandon Pajemski, a guy like Moses Moody, Jonathan Kuminga, if they can get him through a sign and trade. Other packages also involve Draymond Green, because that's really the only player that would work financially, along with a guy like Moses Moody, a guy like Brandon Pajemski. And as someone that has watched a lot of Warriors basketball this season, I can tell you that Brandon Pajemski, though he had his lulls in the regular season as an offensive player, he's a guy that's always going to give you incredible rebounding acumen for a guy of his size. He led the league in charges when he was a rookie, and I believe he was top 2 or 3 this season in offensive fouls and charges drawn. And he's just an incredibly valuable guy to have, though he may not develop into necessarily an all-star caliber player in the future. Pajemski is one of those guys that can definitely make a difference if a team is looking to go on a massive title run. You need guys like Brandon Pajemski. He's reminding me a lot of guys like Dante DiVincenzo. I guess a guy like Nickeil Alexander-Walker on the Timberwolves, excuse me. Just great 3-and-D guys that, even though he hasn't proven that his jump shot is super consistent, he can knock down the three. And this past year, he started out shooting terrible, but started to escalate. If Brandon Pajemski were to make his way to the Milwaukee Bucks, he is a foundational piece to a possible championship contender in the very near future, if they could also pull off some other moves around the margins, get a couple guys in there that can make a difference. Of course, sending Giannis out, it would be going back to square one, but if they could somehow retool in the next 2-3 years around guys like Kuminga, around guys like Moody, who also has amazing 3-and-D potential, as I'd like to say, maybe it's a little bit of a stretch. I think he might be the Warriors if he remains on the Warriors. I think he's the Warriors' new generation Andre Iguodala in a way, with a better jump shot. His defensive potential, I feel like, is off the charts, just because of his agility, his strength, his ability to move his feet. He's just a great matchup, and the Warriors were using him a lot against guys like Anthony Edwards in the playoffs, just against main matchups like Ja Morant in the play-in game. Moses Moody is definitely a difference maker as well. Same with Jonathan Kuminga, who, as we all saw in the Timberwolves series, that he can turn into an alpha scorer, it seems like, just at the flip of a switch. So if all of those guys were to make their way to the Milwaukee Bucks, and if they were to gain some sort of draft capital out of that deal, it would be an amazing pickup for the Bucks. Of course, dealing Giannis Antetokounmpo is the worst thing that you could possibly imagine, but gaining a package including Bajemski, including Moody, including Kuminga, potential first-round draft capital, not too bad of an outcome. So, yeah, that's all I have, and go Bucks. See you in the next one.